And greetings and welcome to the QCast. This is season 4, episode 39. And this is the greatest time of year, folks. It is bracketology season. It is D3 Hoops bracketology season. And folks, I have the two GOATs with me here. On the screen, as you're looking to the left there, that is Mr. Matt Snyder of the D3 Datacast. On your right on the screen is Mr. Drew Pasteur, Mr. D3 Bubble. Gentlemen, let me start out with Drew. Drew, this is I hope for you it's one of your favorite times of the year as well. It's kind of the culmination of all the stuff you're doing with D3 Bubble. How are you doing, and how great is it that we're at this time of year?
Yeah, great. It's always fun to talk with the folks around the country in the D3 scene at this time of year, even as all three of our teams are either looking at already being in, or in your case and mine, trying to play their way
That's
in
correct.
right now.
It is a great time of year, and Drew, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And Matt, you've been all over the place with D3 Datacast this season. Another great season where you're bringing us, regional ranking predictions and just week after week, great stuff. How are you doing, Matt? And how are we feeling at this time of season?
It's very busy. It's a fun busy though, but we're getting something every day. It feels like the regional rankings we had, the top 16 reveal, we're going to be in conference championship season. So it is real busy, but that's kind of, we all love this. That's why we spend so much time on it, not because anything else, except for it's fun. But yeah, this is the time of the year that we kind of work up for the whole season. So it's fun to be here.
And Matt, I know that there's a little buzz in the podcasting world about some of the production coming out of the QCast lately. I appreciate the love on that. And what do you think about the QCast now kind of sharing PowerPoint slides and stuff? Are you surprised by that?
This is big. It is surprising to me. I did not know that you had this technology available, but it's big.
Well, really appreciate you guys being here. And what we're going to cover today is Pool C. Our focus today is Pool C. So we'll get into a few other topics, but the objective of this QCast is we would like to help people understand how Pool C works, which I think people get that are tuning in. Most of this is going to be about specifics, like where is my team right now in the process? Am I in good shape? Am I in bad shape? Do I need to win a ball game tomorrow? So with that, and guys, you can see that screen, correct?
Yes.
All good. Okay. Start out. Very, very quick reminder on dates, where we are. We've made it through the second national committee ranking, the second regional ranking. We've made it through the top 16 reveal, which was not on this important date. I think it probably should have been. So that was last night. And here we are in this kind of progression, heading to some fun stuff as we go. I just wanted to quickly start with dates. Also, a quick reminder on the way the 64 bids are allocated. And guys, check me on this, make sure I'm right, is we have 42 conferences that receive an AQ, an automatic qualifier. Those are Pool A bids. And this year we have 2 more than last year. We have 22 at-large bids, which are called Pool C. Am I correct on the numbers before we move forward?
Yeah, looks correct.
Okay, we're all good. We don't need to spend a ton of time on primary selection criteria. We've covered that in other shows. Here they are in front of you. Win-loss percentage. It's win-loss percentage, not record. Division III head-to-head. Results versus common Division III opponents. Results versus ranked D3 teams. And strength of schedule. Those 5 things represent the primary criteria. And Drew and Matt, what I've heard pretty consistently now for a few years is that the committee really tries to make these decisions based on the primary criteria and really prefers not to go into secondary. Matt, your thoughts on that? Am I saying that correctly?
That's what we've heard. That's what we've heard from Luke this year, what we heard from Sarah last year, that sometimes they'll look at it, sometimes they'll use it, but they really try to make a decision based on what they say the first page of the primary criteria, if they at all can. So yeah, I think that's largely the case, and it seems like that's the case. We don't see them making odd decisions, I don't think, based on secondary criteria that would have been flipped on primary criteria.
Drew, anything on your end on that kind of use of primary versus secondary? What's that, Drew?
Matt hit the nail on the head. Not much else to say.
Perfect. Thank you. Now let's get into the meat of it, guys. So a good starting point in this conversation is that the regional rankings drive the way the process works. And we just got our second regional ranking, which was the first one that had numbers to it, the first one that was in an order. So we're looking at on the screen regions 1 to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the reason this is important, guys, and make sure again that I'm laying this out the right way. I'll just pull up like region 6 as an example. For the first thing we have to do is determine like which team is in pool A and which team is in pool C. For the exercise we're going to do, I made some judgment calls and I put teams in certain buckets. Like in region 1, even though Trinity is the highest ranked team in the region, I call Williams the pool A right now because they're the 1 seed in the NESCAC tourney. Now Trinity can win the tournament and be the A. In the ARC, which is region 9, I'm putting Nebraska Wesleyan as the pool A because they have swept Co and they're tied with Co. So the first thing we have to do in doing this is we have to, in making a pool C projection, we have to put teams in pool A or pool C. And so we'll show you what we've done with that in just a second. And then Matt, the other part of this that's key is the order. The order the order is key in lining up the teams. Can you talk a little bit about how that works with like how this order is important in the pool C process?
Yeah. So when they get to the final rankings, which we don't see until after the bracket, they will take the region orders and then they'll subtract the teams that have already won the AQ. So then you're only left with these pool C, these at-large eligible teams. And then they take the top available team from each region. So that'll be 10 teams, one from each region, onto like the selection board. And then they'll consider those 10 teams together. So if you are, second or third in your region, you cannot be considered for tournament selection until those teams above you, if you have not won the AQ, until those teams above you have already been selected into the tournament. So the order is really key. It's really key for the prognosticators like us in getting that order correct, because you might think a team has a really good pool C resume, but if they're blocked from the table by a team below them, maybe they're not getting into the tournament. And that really, really matters come selection Sunday.
And we'll see that when we're going to go 22 rounds quickly, and you're going to see some situations where we talk about, is this team blocking another team? If we look at just the screen, region 9, let's say, Co, Loras, and Dubuque are all pool C teams from the ARC, if we assume Nebraska Wesleyan to be the A. Well, Co's got to get in before Loras can get a shot, and Loras has got to get in before Dubuque gets a shot. So the round by round view of this is really important. And Drew, I think another thing that comes out of this is we'll probably run into a couple of situations where we think that even by now, a few days after the last data, where we think maybe the regional rankings need to change. That's probably like I look at your stuff, Drew, and you'll project a certain team and I'll say, well, how are they ever going to get to the table? And then I'll say, well, you know what? Drew's data shows that maybe the rankings are already out of date. Like Mount Union comes to mind, for example. Is fair to say, Drew, that like your data can help us understand where maybe a ranking's about to flip?
Certainly could. And then sometimes I'm looking ahead to of future games that are still left, both regular season and tournament. I think one of the nuances that's important for the viewers to understand as well, though, is that the regional advisory committees come up with their rankings, but the National Selection Committee can change them. So if the National Selection Committee sees a team and thinks, wow, Team A really has a better Pool C resume than Team B, but they're currently behind them in the rankings, they can flip that ranking before it ever comes public,
right,
and move those teams. So that should help reduce the number of situations where a team is blocked by one with a resume that would be considered inferior.
Yeah, and that is a big factor. Is if, let's say, the RAC lines them up in a certain way, the national committee can make a final decision there, based on the fact they're looking at all the regions. So great point. The top 16 reveal is another place I wanted to go before we get into the rounds. Matt, the top 16 reveal, it's a fun thing. It's kind of strange in a way because it's already old. By the time yesterday it came out, there were games Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and in progress Thursday that change all this. But the useful part about it for prognosticators, bracketologists, is that we at least know at a snapshot in time of the Sunday data, we know that this was the order of these 16 teams. And from a Pool C standpoint, as I look at the board, again, we have to make guesses on who's a Pool C, but we know that like Hampton Sydney is ahead of who would be the next one on here? That's Case. Sydney's ahead of Case. Case is ahead of Trinity, Connecticut, and Trinity, Connecticut's ahead of Guilford. So while the data has changed already, at least we know how they were evaluating these. Talk about, Matt, what that tells us as we start to do a little bracketology.
Yeah, well, one thing we don't get during the regional ranking process is any sort of comparison between the regions. And I think this top 16 is really good for that. You could see, Region 6, we know that there's a lot of good teams in Region 6, but they're all above, say, Keene State, who's the top team in Region 2. So we know what the depth of Region 6 is compared to Region 2 just by looking at this. And even though the data is out of date, and the committee chairs said that on Hoopsville a lot, like data changes day by day and minute by minute. So this is just a snapshot in time. But what I find it really helpful is, one, validating how maybe I think about the regions and see if it matches up with the committee, but then just to see their picture of how they think the regions stack up, at least at the top, with one another.
And Matt, I heard you guys last on a Hoopsville in the breakdown. I think one of your takeaways seemed to be that as you looked at the order that they put these teams in, you're feeling like they're looking at kind of key wins. So wins over teams that are maybe on this board, or wins that maybe over a 1 or a 2 in a region. It seems like you were finding that they were really digging into the RROs to see who you beat in those.
Yeah, to me, it looked like if the other metrics were close, or even sometimes if they were just in range with each other, having a win against a number 1 in a region, particularly if it's a strong region, or other number 2s, having a quantity of those types of wins, I think that really benefited you. Teams that only had maybe wins over like a 4, a 5, and a 6 in a region, those teams seemed like maybe they were sliding down a spot or 2 further than they might otherwise, just given their winning percentage and strength of schedule. So they're not just looking at how many wins versus regionally ranked or your overall record there. The quality of those wins, I think, is mattering big time.
And as we go through this exercise, it's a good transition point, because that's where kind of I took this thing in creating a format for us to talk is I added a little column over there to the right that says, wins over top 16 reveal, or a 1 and a 2 in a region. And I just thought that, again, let me stress, that's not an official thing. That's part of the criteria. The criteria is, results versus regional ranked opponents. But just in case it helps us, I put that data over to the right where we could see that like Hampton Sydney has a win over Widener, who's in the top 16, John Carroll's in the top 16, and Randolph Macon. Those would be 3 enormous gold chips. Drew, the other part of this I wanted to stress, as this is what the round 1 board would look like if now caveat that this data is only through Wednesday and it doesn't include Thursday. There was a smattering of games last night and those aren't factored in. So my data is already old. This is through Wednesday. But Drew, this if we assume that my Pool A projections are correct and like Williams is the A and not Trinity, this is the Pool C board in round 1. Just talk a little bit, Drew, about that landscape, like how they have 10 teams on the board and how that plays out.
Sure. Yeah, they're looking at which one of these has the strongest resume right now to be the next, or in this case, the first at large that's in. So some of those you'll be able to comparatively eliminate immediately. If you look at Stockton right now on the board, where they've won fewer than 2/3 of their games, their strength of schedule is good, but not elite. They're not going to get selected over somebody like a Hampton Sydney that has an elite strength of schedule and only 2 losses the whole season. So some of these early round comparisons, we can really zip right through pretty quickly Or even if there are 2 or 3 teams that are all really strong on the board, there's the understanding of we're not seeding right now, so it's not hard to go ahead and make a selection and recognize with 20 more teams to get in, all of those strong teams are going to get in.
Yeah, this is where, I think the important thing on this is what Drew said, and just understanding that this is how the process works. They put one team from each region on the board, and then they pick a team out of there among the 10. And when that team's picked, they have to take a team from the region that left and put them back on the board. Everyone cool? If I call Hampton-Sydney the number 1 overall pick, is that an easy one?
Mark it down.
Sure.
Yeah.
And again, going back to this, guys, we got a freebie here because the committee told us that Hampton-Sydney is the overall number 1, which means they have to be the number 1 Pool C pick. We know that for sure. There's not many things we're guaranteed. We're guaranteed that currently. Round 2, now again, going back to the top 16 reveal, remember the order: Hampton-Sydney, Case, Trinity, Guilford. So Case Western Reserve is another one of these teams with a monster resume. They have these key wins with NYU and Oswego and WashU. Anything we would add to putting Case Western Reserve in the field quickly? Done deal.
I think they're just an easy top selection there.
I'm going to stay with that order stay with the order from here because we kind of know these things to be true. There's Trinity, Connecticut. Now, again, it's possible we could look at Trinity, Connecticut as the Pool A. I prefer always to keep like the number 1 seed in the conference tourney as the A in my prognostication. But do you guys in your stuff, are you calling Williams or Trinity the A currently?
I have Trinity as the A because they're the most likely
Right.
team to win it. I have several conferences where I have a team that's not the number 1 seed or the conference leader because maybe out of how they're playing now, they're the most likely winner going forward. Perhaps that has to do with a tournament bracket or this sort of thing.
Matt, how about you?
Yeah.
Like, do you also use kind of like your highest rated team mathematically is your A currently?
Yeah, in the case of a conference tie, then I go with like my strongest rated team by the efficiency ratings, in which case is Trinity. But we know either team could win the tournament, but I would consider a little bit more likely that Trinity would win at this point.
So I just want to stress to people that like I've got Trinity as a Pool C candidate, which is why they're here. They come off the board here, and we haven't yet had to really even evaluate too many of the other teams. Again, this is the 4th team from the top 16 reveal, the 4th and final that we can say is a no-brainer. Guilford, 875, 552, 5-2. They have a win over the overall number 1. And again, we saw them in the top 16 reveal. Are we all cool that Guilford would be the logical number 4 in?
Yes.
Yeah, they're a lock at some point.
So now we get into some probably better discussions here. Matt, I think you talked about Hood last night on Hoopsville. It seems to me that Hood is knocking on the door of the top 16. And from what I did a couple days ago to this, I bumped Hood all the way up to the next team on the board at number 5, 783, 571, 4-3. And you can see that host of incredible gold chip wins that they have over to the right. Matt, your thoughts on Hood as like one of the no-brainer Pool Cs?
Yeah, they're definitely going to be a no-brainer Pool C. Even as high as round 5, I think there's definitely they definitely have the strongest discussion of anyone here. You can see, we're getting away from some of the most elite winning percentages.
Yep.
And then of the remaining group, they have one of the best strengths of schedules. And then if you look especially at the quality of the regionally ranked wins, I don't think there's, really anyone else that gets that close to them besides Stockton, but maybe for other reasons, they're not quite in the discussion yet.
And Drew, I think the word outliers comes up on occasion when you hear from the committee members. The way I look at this, Drew, and tell me if you see it differently, is I don't need to go with an outlier at this point because I have resumes that are strong across the board. Meaning like St. Thomas, Texas has a 507 SOS and Stockton has a 640 winning percentage and Clark only has 2 RRO wins. It seems like at this part of the board, I'm able to cherry pick a lot more and really look for a team that's got everything. And am I saying that correctly, Drew, in terms of like, I don't need to go down the road of the outlier quite yet?
Right, I'm with you. In general, teams that have a balanced resume of being at least good and solid in all three areas and very strong in at least one of those are going to be more likely to be picked early on than those that have some glaring weakness, even if it's offset by a strength in another area. The team that's 25-2 and has only a 500 SOS, that's going to be a discussion for a later round when there's clear picks like this here. Maybe Hood's winning percentage being just under 700, maybe that's a conversation with Co. But Hood has such a solid set of wins, including over the number 4 overall team Widener, that this is not difficult at this point to put them into the field.
And remember, these numbers are all good. They change every day. Last night there were some games played in Texas, and the results of those games moved decimal points on SOS's teams in Illinois. Right. So yeah. Mary Hardin Baylor winning means that Illinois Wesleyan's SOS, some little tick happened. And so these numbers change, and then teams play games. So tonight we're going to have all these UAA games, and all of a sudden all this changes. So we want to make sure everyone knows this is a snapshot in time. The date is through Wednesday. While we could debate if Hood is 5 or 6 or 7, are we all good that Hood's an easy put on the board here?
Yep, they're in. Okay.
And I think I think we're still in the same place of like an easy one. Tufts was not in the top 16 reveal. Is that correct? Yeah, they didn't make it. I think we think they were 17 or 18, Matt, right? They were really close to making this, right?
Yeah.
I view Tufts as having one of the easy resumes here, 750, 569, with a win over Keene State, which is a number 1 and a top 16 team. I also will mention that our last pick, Hood, brings another Region 5 to the board, which is Eastern. So one of the things we want you to be picking up on is that when one team leaves, another team hits the board, and that was Eastern. Any other team, again, we're not breaking this down in tons of detail, maybe like we would at the Hoopsville show at the end. But are we good that Tufts is a safe pick here?
I agree. Yeah. And for what it's worth, on my board, this is the last selection where somebody is a stone cold lock that it doesn't matter if they just get crushed in their regular season finale, knocked out in the quarterfinal of their tournament or whatever. All of these teams, there is nothing that can happen that would put them out of the field. Then we get into the ones that, wow, it'd be a real shock if they didn't get in. But Tufts is still at the point. There's nothing they can do at this point to play themselves out of the tournament.
Completely agree. And it's one of the final, like, complete lock, like just put them on the board. This one's an easy one here at pick 6. So Tufts leaves, and we put Connecticut College on the board in Region 1. And now the board's starting to look different. Now we're starting to kind of have to dig in a little bit. But that said, when I started digging in here, I'm still looking at like across the board great resume. And for me, I didn't need to go to 696 winning percentage yet with Virginia Wesleyan. I kind of can say, well, Co 833, 554, and 5. Now, Matt, my question is, Co doesn't have any writing over there in that right column, do they? They don't have a win over a 1 or a 2 or a top 16. How do you view Co's resume at this stage, Matt?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a solid resume. They do have a number of regional ranked wins, and that will lend in their favor. As you mentioned, they're not going to be top-notch quality wins. They're all kind of wins against other American Rivers teams like Loras and Dubuque, and I think they have a win over Central. But those are teams that have been kind of the middle to the back half of Region 9. So I think this is starting to be where they have more of those discussions, like Drew said, about are these really the resumes we want to take? We still have plenty of time, plenty of selections to go, but you want to start making sure you're getting these right here, or in an approximately right order. But I think, to me, with Co, with the 833 winning percentage, that starts to stand out as one of the better winning percentages on the board.
Right.
And their SOS is kind of in line with the better SOSs as well. So given that they have also a quantity of regionally ranked wins, I think that they're definitely in the discussion for the next pick here.
And I think go ahead, Drew.
The other thing to remember along with this is when we talk about ones and twos off of regions, not all those regions are equal. There's some regions where the second ranked team in the region is a bubble team.
Right.
And in this case, we've got a bunch of solid teams in this region because of the depth of the ARC. So being the third or fourth best team in that region is still a real quality win. One of the ways that I sometimes think about this is how many of those teams are bubble or better kinds of teams that they have wins over. That's not part of the criteria officially, but they do look at the quality of those wins, as we've been saying. And there's a difference between beating a 3 that is going to have to win their conference to get in and beating a 3 that's easily going to be in tournament.
I think what you're seeing here is that round 7's the point where we're starting to have some conversation. Like the first 6 rounds, we just in, done. And with Co, I think we're all good with Co. By the way, these are my picks, so these guys didn't get a chance to see these or sign off on them. So this is how I saw the process, and they're reacting to it. But with Co, we do have to talk a little bit because there's not one of those signature wins. But let's put them in and let's see who that brings to round 8. That brings Loris to the board, which is interesting because their SOS is under 500. No team's ever gotten a pool C that I'm aware of with an SOS under 500. But I think I should stress that it doesn't mean that there's some kind of line there. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. I feel like D3 Bracketology Nation is a little bit like Scarred, and everyone thinks there's a line at 500. But Matt, you've talked about SOS a lot and stuff, and would you agree that like it doesn't mean Loris can absolutely get in here, absolutely get in? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, not at this pick, but I think they're still in the mix. Definitely, they're a team that's going to want to continue to build that SOS through their conference tournament and make a big of a run and play as many other quality teams in the American Rivers. There's no line, but 495 is going to be a significant outlier to the negative side in the Pool C discussion. To me, once you really start getting below 525, you start to get more on dicey ground there, where they're going to look at that as kind of more of a strong negative. So Loris is not out of the Pool C mix, but they're a team that their deep run in a conference tournament is going to boost that SOS, and they're going to probably need that to feel like they're on solid ground.
And for what it's worth, they've still got a regular season game left with Dubuque. Tomorrow that's going to boost that. Then you go into the tournament of strong league. I'm projecting them to end up at about 515, if somewhere between 510 and 520, depending on whether they make the final. That, while still, like Matt said, is on the low end, it's much more doable. Whereas something under 500, if this is a final resume, I'm not sure if that's a team you can take. But at 510 to 520, when you're talking about an 8-something win percentage and multiple quality wins, then that's a different story. So I think, barring an early exit and a loss tomorrow, Loris probably gets there eventually.
Well, it'll be interesting because in this exercise, spoiler alert, I put them in, and I'm interested to see your reactions to where I probably put them in high, like quicker than I thought too. So like when we get to that, I want to dig into that. But here's the board at this point. Now, a couple things on the board. Clark and Hobart's resume, winning percentage, SOS, solid. There's some RRO wins. You'll notice there isn't one of those like what we're calling kind of signature wins over there. And for those reasons, what you're going to find in this process is that when I was doing this, that created those teams kind of hung on this board for a while for me. And I gravitated to teams that had some of these other things. And when I got to this round, I didn't expect to be looking sub 700 winning percentage yet. But Virginia Wesleyan, 696, 593, 4-4. And a win over Randolph-Macon and Guilford, which, like, oh, by the way, remember this deal. Randolph-Macon and Guilford are both on here. Like, would you guys think it's crazy to go to the Virginia Wesleyan well here, or what are your thoughts on where I'm taking Virginia Wesleyan?
For me, that's definitely in range. And it's not just the quality of their RRO wins either. That strength of schedule, 593, that's getting close to a nationally elite level. That's going to be one of the higher numbers in the country. So when you're talking about that and still kind of flirting with a 700 winning percentage. I think that's a resume we've seen taken a lot. Now also pair that with 4 regionally ranked wins, 2 of which are now nationally significant. I think that this is the range where we start having the Virginia Wesleyan discussion, and I'm kind of projecting them in that like Pool C 7 to 9 range myself as well. So I think this is right in there.
Drew, how about you?
I would make the same selection here, Virginia Wesleyan at this point. Once that winning percentage drops into the 600s, you have to think a little more about it. But I agree, the overall quality of the resume here with an elite strength of schedule and top-notch win, I can't argue at all.
It's going to get interesting when we see the same kind of resume, but the winning percentage is much lower than this in a second. That it's going to get. I had a hard time working through that part. So let's put Virginia Wesleyan on the board, and that brings up Emory. Okay, so Virginia Wesleyan leaves. Look at Emory's winning percentage, 636. Everyone last year went crazy over Rochester getting in at 640. Now we're 636. And remember, the UAA teams don't have to lose to be Pool Cs. They don't have a conference tournament. So if Emory wins, the remaining 3 games, or even 2 of the last 3, the numbers would go up here. But it starts to get interesting with an Emory resume, Matt, like 636, but then monster SOS 591, the highest RROs on the board, a win over WashU. To Drew's point, like, I hate to say, Region 8's down, right? The top of Region 8, the 1 and the 2, those aren't strong resumes. So how do you interpret Emory's resume, Matt, in terms of the board at this point?
I think it's a very interesting Pool C resume. I think as far as the board goes at this point, for me, Emory's not in strong consideration because I don't really, they have some outliers maybe to the negative without really too many to the positive. I think they're in the mix. I think we're going to have conversations about teams like Emory, like Carnegie Mellon, like Mary Washington, and like Stockton. Teams that are flirting with that 640 line that we saw Rochester last year. Again, we want to be careful to say there's no lines in the criteria above or below which, but you start feeling really dicey when that area teams are in that area. But can strength of schedule, can quality of regionally ranked wins carry the day? I think they are definitely in that mix. For me, it's a few rounds later than this, though, I think.
Yeah, and I think with Rochester's resume last year, what it's important to remind folks is it was a 640, yes, but the SOS was at 630, and the RRO wins was 10. And if we had a Rochester on the board, that column to the right would have been full of these wins over 1s and 2s. That Rochester resume was way stronger than this Emory resume and what you're going to see from Carnegie Mellon. So I just want to point that out, that like, I think these teams are going to be very much in consideration, but we have to remember how much of a unicorn Rochester's SOS and RROs were last year. I picked, again, I don't know that this team is a huge debate. I kind of picked, like, I went across the board. I tried to find the strongest overall, easiest choice. And I went with Connecticut College at 750, 560, two wins, but with a big win over Tufts. Your thoughts, guys? Is there any, I guess what I'm asking is, am I putting a team in that you guys don't even have in your top 22, or do you feel okay with Connecticut College here?
This is the first one that I really questioned. When I think about bid thieves that we're going to get to talk about later on, I'm really looking at filling 18 of those teams rather than the full 22. And I had Con as my number 19. So I'm not quite there. On them yet.
Yeah, no, that's why you guys are here. So Drew's a little shaky on Connecticut or Con College at round 9. Matt, what about you?
I'm a little shaky on Con College too. I think for me on this board, I might be more looking at a WashU. Their strength of schedule is really high, and I think they have a really good win in Case Western. I think that's a better win than Tufts from what we saw in the top 16. And I think, over 30 points of strength of schedule gap right here is significant. I would probably be leaning WashU here rather than Con College. That's very fair. And again, so my board had Connecticut College. As I look at WashU, I absolutely can agree with that'd be
that'd probably be a really safe pick here. You know, for me, what it probably was, do I need to go down to 682 yet? Or can I get someone that's got across the board? I probably went that kind of a safe direction. So that's where I put them in. And then we flip to 10. And we, by the way, Albertus Magnus hits the board here. So now they're sitting on the board, and we'll get to kind of their resume in a little bit. But now for me in round 10, I was Calvin or Wash U. And this is the ultimate winning percentage versus the other stuff debate. Calvin's 875, 534, 2. Matt, your alma mater doesn't have any writing over to the right. Wash U is 682, 596. And wins over, they've got Case. And I guess I don't know how sorry, they don't have a win over Illinois Wesleyan. I was about to say they had a win over Illinois Wesleyan, which is not true. So I put Calvin in here because of the winning percentage. Drew, we'll ask Matt to just take a pause. This is his alma mater. As a Worcester person, Drew, what do you think of me taking Calvin here?
I agree. Actually, I had Calvin a little higher on my board and just overlooked them earlier. I think at some point when you've got a reasonable SOS, even though you don't have that elite win, if we look at who they beat that are top 100 type teams, it's Marietta, it's Wisconsin Lacrosse, Berry, Hope. They still have the game left tomorrow at Trine. That's the opportunity just to put the hammer down on this and take all question out of it. But I agree, Calvin is easily going to be a tournament team. When you win almost 90% of your games against a reasonable, solid schedule, even without a lot of elite opponents, that's going to be a sooner or later in for sure.
Let me ask Matt that to comment on that. Are you, Matt, as a fan, right? So as a fan, I'm well aware of like the implications of Illinois Wesleyan's game against North Central. And then like, I know what's up. You know what's up. If Calvin doesn't beat Trine in that MIAA finale, that's such a huge opportunity for them to seal the deal on this. Would you get nervous at all about Carnegie Mellon? I mean, talk to me about that.
That would be the threat to Calvin is, does Carnegie Mellon win enough but also lose enough that they're not a solid in and they're not a solid out, and they somehow pull the fast one that they just did against Mount Union and climb one more spot and then kind of sit on the bubble as a tough resume to get past. I think that's the danger. I do kind of agree with Drew. I think right now Calvin's a team that looks like they should be in. Depends on what the national landscape is. Is there a bunch of bid thieves like last year? Do they lose to Trine and then lose in the MIAA tournament? That could get a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
I will say we mentioned this game at Trine, and we've mentioned how data changes. Calvin at Trine is Calvin's probably best SOS game of the season, and they haven't played it yet. So their numbers are going to go up, or their SOS will go up, win or lose, and then they'll get MIAA tournament game or two to raise the SOS as well. I think winning percentage is now guaranteed to stay above 800. So the data is going to change. They're going to be at least an 800, 550 team on the table. So I think eventually they find their way in. A win against Trine would lock it down this week, and they'd get some writing over on the right-hand side that would help them in. Exactly. That being said, we're talking Calvin versus Wash U. For me, these two teams are almost even on my board. And so either direction you go, I think would be okay.
Yeah, I went with the winning percentage here. I feel like Calvin has a great resume, maybe lacking that one signature thing, but still Wash U's winning percentage is 682. And as I'm looking at this, I went with Calvin, and that brings Carnegie Mellon to the board. And what I'd ask everyone to look at is Emory and Carnegie Mellon's winning percentages versus everything else. By the way, like, look at Carnegie Mellon's other stuff. They have two wins over NYU. They swept NYU. They have a win over Case. They have a win over Wash U. You're talking about some significant. So we're talking like that Calvin route of like, you lose. Is the game at Trine, Matt? Game at Trine?
At Trine.
You lose at Trine, and then you lose in the MIAA. And let's say Carnegie Mellon, I can't remember their schedule and who they've got like tonight, Sunday, but let's say they win two. that resume all of a sudden's a monster, right? So it's those things over to the right, especially, I think, that become powerful. So
Yeah.
I just point, I would not take Carnegie Mellon here. I put Wash U in here. Is everyone good with, we've talked about Wash U? Is everyone good with them getting in here?
Yeah, I'm good with that. Two other things on the discussion of Carnegie Mellon and Emory, even before we get down to those late rounds. One is, I think we do see something of a line once we get to 2/3, 667 winning percentage. If you have a WashU that wins 2 out of their last 3 to finish at 680 with this kind of resume, that's a lock. No concerns at
Agree.
that point.
Agree.
However, a UAA team that picks up that 9th loss and ends up 16-9, 640, like Rochester last year, they're going to have impossibly high numbers in the other categories to get in as a bubble team. And I think Carnegie Mellon's got the potential to do that. I think they could be a discussion at 640. But for me, if they end up at 640 and we're looking at that as compared to Calvin, I just can't see them passing Calvin. And if Carnegie Mellon gets up to 680 by winning out, at that point, this is not a hard decision for them to get in. So I really don't see them blocking Calvin. Meanwhile, on the other side, for Calvin, they play Trine, like Matt said. That's a huge SOS game. Suppose they get them again in the MAIA final and they lose to get swept 3-0 by that team. By this point, their SOS is up to 560.
Right.
You put a 560 SOS with an 8-something winning percentage, with or without the big kicker win, they're getting in the tournament.
I agree with that. And there's some teams that we'll see hit the board that I picked in a few rounds that have that kind of resume. So I'm with you. I think Calvin seems like they're in a good spot. Wash U, I put in here. And let's see, that brings what, Elmhurst to the board. So Elmhurst is another really interesting one. Elmhurst, I believe, I've been on the train of Elmhurst has a better chance at this than I think than the numbers might indicate, that everyone's staring at that 499, which I get. But 800, 499, 3, including a win over a number 1. And I know that IW as a number 1 is not a high number 1, but it's a number 1. So Elmhurst to me is, we'll get to it, but we'll get to where they get competitive. Now, this is probably one you're going to disagree with, guys, but I wasn't willing to go down to the 640 winning percentage of Stockton yet. I was staring at Stockton. I was looking at kind of Albertus, Clark, and Hobart saying, and I was looking at those 636s. I wasn't going there yet. Eastern, I was looking at Eastern a little bit. St. Thomas has the win over Trinity. I liked Loris's winning percentage, 5 RRO wins, and 2 wins over Nebraska Wesleyan. Am I crazy putting Loris in at round 12?
Well, for me, I'm looking ahead. So I would say if this resume is on selection Monday, I don't think they get in. I just don't think we see a team with a 4-something SOS, unless maybe they're 26-1, maybe. However, by the time that they finish that season, they've still got another game left. I forget who they have tomorrow in the ARC tournament. That number is going to turn into somewhere between 510 and 520. That's a different conversation to have. And so for that reason, I think they're going to get in.
But just in terms of this board, though, Drew, like in terms of this board, you definitely disagree. You would not put them in here. Matt, how about you?
No, I'd be a no as well. I think 495 we've seen in regional rankings and the like be a significant disadvantage. And I think given what we see on the board, even like a Carnegie Mellon, I would go that direction right now versus Loris.
This is where I feel like that we're all scarred, and we all are. I feel like this is where we think there is a sub 500 thing, because in my opinion, guys, like when I look at the board and I do my job and I look at the totality of the resume, as Luke says, I'm picturing the old school balance, and I'm putting my chips on each side. I think it goes like this for Loris. Like I like Loris's resume, even though the SOS hurts them. Their winning percentage is 833. They have 5 ROO wins, and Nebraska Wesleyan's a number 2. So this will be an I wish we could have the answer. I wish we could hit a button and someone would tell us if we're right or wrong. But yeah, I put Loris in here. I like the totality of their resume here. So after I put them in, then Dubuque hit the board. Okay, so Dubuque's on the board now. This is where I got into, like, now it's round 13. We're starting to kind of scrap, right? We're starting to get into, like, everyone's got some kind of problem on their resume. Any objections to Stockton 640, 566, 5-4 with a bunch of good wins over there, including Keene State and Rowan? Am I crazy putting Stockton in, or can we live with that?
I might look then directly right back at Dubuque, who just hit the board for me. And I think maybe they're one of those resumes that's a little bit more even across the board. They don't have the exact number or all of the high quality wins that a team like Stockton does, but they do have, looks like a pretty good win against Nebraska Wesleyan, but a 544 SOS and a 792 winning percentage, I think maybe would take it over Stockton here.
So let me ask you this, Matt. So that what you're saying then is that the RAC and the National Committee have the order wrong in Region 9, because what you're saying is Loris for you would block Dubuque. Dubuque would never get to the board with you making the picks, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they necessarily have the order wrong, because we're not really looking at head-to-head dynamics or common opponents, which would be more would exist more inside of a region, and especially inside of a conference. And once you compare nationally, you wouldn't maybe have those. So there might be a reason, without diving into it, that Loris is above Dubuque in the region. But then once Loris goes, maybe Dubuque compares better nationally to a Stockton, or that could definitely happen.
Yeah, and let's again, let's just for a second, let's go back to our regional rankings. Region 9, Loris 4, Dubuque 5. So now we got to go back to our what round were we at there, guys? We were at this one. Now, if the committee put Loris ahead of Dubuque, with Loris having an SOS of what it is, doesn't that mean that the committee, the real people making these decisions, doesn't that mean that they view that resume better than Dubuque's, and therefore Loris's is more competitive than you two think? Or am I saying that wrong? That's how I look at it. Like, they put Loris ahead of Dubuque.
Yeah, I mean, it does get tricky. It gets tricky when you're talking about head-to-heads and common opponents and the like. I think Loris and Dubuque, Loris was 1-0 against Dubuque. They still have a game to play against each other. So if that turns into a split, I think maybe that flips back. I think we're getting into a lot of the data can change type of situations. And I know the arc is crazy, where you have one team always beat another who always beat another. So I think those dynamics came into play for me in Region 9. I didn't predict Loris quite as high as the committee had them. So there was something that they saw, I think, that made a flip. It probably inside of those common opponents or head-to-heads. But once you get nationally, those dynamics maybe go away. I don't think they're just looking at who's the best Pool C candidate necessarily.
Correct.
They're trying to get the regions right first. So I can definitely see this scenario being one where maybe Loris is a little bit less Pool C viable, but for whatever reason right now, they think that they need to be above Dubuque in Region 9.
And Drew, do you agree? Because I agree with Matt that I agree that Dubuque's resume is better than Loris's. I agree that I would take Dubuque much quicker than Loris. And so do you agree with that?
There's going to be a lot in flux in that region with tomorrow's games and the conference tournament. That whole region could get turned upside down, but it is one of those where there's enough bubble teams and enough teams that are maybe close to each other overall, but with different kinds of resumes. It's going to matter a lot what the regional advisory committee does there, and then what the national committee decides to do with that at the end. Some regions, the rankings are going to be pretty clear. Some, it's only going to matter for RRO wins. That is, you get a bunch of teams that are not viable. But then in some of them, it's going to matter a whole lot. Regarding Stockton in particular, I don't see them being a viable pick here. when you get that 640 win percentage, I think it's got to be a unicorn in the other categories. And even though they've got the quality of wins, the 566 SOS is just not enough for me for them to get picked. I think if you're at that 640 number, like some of the UAA teams probably will be, you've got to have an SOS pushing 600 of just an unfathomably tough schedule to be able to get in. The other thing about Stockton is they're 16-9 right now. They've still got that conference tournament to play. If they don't win the tournament and they end up 17-10, their winning percentage will be even lower than it is now. I just have a really hard time believing that they're going to get a pool A. I have them at 10% or something if they lose the final. But realistically, they've got to win the NJAC tournament because they can't afford another loss. But I sure wouldn't want to play them in the first or second round if they get in.
And did Stockton lose a game since Sunday? Am I thinking of that the right? Has there been an NJAC game where they may be, where this position of their regional ranking is actually effectively too high? Is my question. Like if I go back, what is that, region 4?
They did. They lost the game to Kane.
So really, Ramapo might be the 4 currently, assuming
Could
Ramapo,
be,
right? So some of this is that, again, the data changes, right, guys? So like Stockton is hitting the board here in the right order based on the regional ranking, but the regional ranking could already kind of effectively be changed, right? Because they're a 640 now, where that before they were something higher. So yeah, and again on this, I think this is bringing out all the right discussions for people to hear, is like how we're all looking at Stockton a little differently at this point of the board. So I put them in here, and then that brought Ramapo to the board. And now this is where I got crazy, right? I went, so now I'm staring at 636, 598, 5. And I thought long and hard on this. To me, 636 is too low. In my head, I'm more in favor of like putting a line in the ground to say like, hey, look, if you're under 667 or something, like, sorry, it's just you can't qualify. But that's not the case. And I'm looking at these numbers relative to the board. So I guess I put Carnegie Mellon in here, guys, way sooner than I would have ever expected. But talk through kind of the options on the board at this point versus what I picked.
I think for me, it's a solid pick. I think I was talking about them a couple rounds ago. I might also look at the Eastern resume. I might be looking at it's getting really tight here. So I'd be looking at half these teams at least. I think I might be looking at Albertus Magnus as well. I'd definitely be looking at Dubuque. And I think for me, on this board, I still might take Carnegie Mellon, but it might come down to Carnegie Mellon and Dubuque for me, I think.
Drew, what about you? Where do you think the Carnegie pick here is a stretch with the 636, or what do you think?
The other parts of the resume are so strong. I think it's legitimately a consideration. And if they finish with 2 wins out of their last 3, that still involves Case again. We could be talking about a sweep of Case as well, or if not, then another win over Emory. They are just, if they get to that 640 mark, that's roughly staying where they're at, the quality of those wins is going to be so overpowering. I think they probably get in my opinion, much like Rochester last year, even though there's going to be a lot of hand wringing around the country when some team that's got an 850 winning percentage and an over 500 strength of schedule gets left out. Or maybe say a Magnus gets left on the board, and there's going to be, how can we take a team that lost 9 games when we've got somebody with a quality resume and won over 80% of theirs, which I get too. But I think Carnegie Mellon is a very viable at-large selection.
Yeah, I think people that are like their teams on the bubble, if there's a team you want to just root against Carnegie Mellon to lose ball games, because I agree that if they're on the board with a 640-ish, they're going to get in. They're going to get in. That's how I see it.
The other thing I'll say is we talked a lot about Rochester last year, and they came down to the end of our mock pool C selections on Hoopsville. In hindsight, I sort of suspect they're a little bit more comfortable than maybe we thought they were at the time, even given the Bid Thieves situation we had last year. I don't think Rochester really was one of those last picks. So even though the Carnegie Mellon resume is not quite that, I think it maybe approximates it, especially at the top quality level of their RROs right now. And I think that they're a team that definitely can get in with this resume.
Last year, Matt, I had in my own personal selection Sunday pool C thing, I had Rochester as like 13. Yeah, and we only pushed them down on the show because we had so much debate. So we pushed them and pushed them. I think that they were more like 13. Yeah. So this is the great discussion on Carnegie. I put them in, and then Mount Union hits the board. And I've tweeted this a couple times. I think Mount Union is in enormous trouble. 750, 552, playing in Region 7. They somehow don't have a win over a 1 or a 2 or a top 16. That shocked me to realize. But Drew, do you agree that Mount Union is in trouble as they're hitting the board with this resume, or how do you look at that?
They are. I think one of the things that's happened is that the Ohio conferences are both down this year. Mount Union has some wins that would normally be higher quality wins than what they are. In that they beat Marietta, they beat Worcester.
Yep.
They've got wins over Heidelberg and an Otterbein team that's not out of it yet, and that they face again tomorrow. But they just didn't. Sometimes your scheduling doesn't pan out. When you play Worcester and Marietta and John Carroll and so on, you expect to have more than 2 regionally ranked opponents out of that schedule. So with both of those conferences being way down, the North Coast, by the way, is a clear 1-bid league. Nobody's getting an at-large out of that league. And now the Ohio Athletic Conference is looking a little thin. I agree. I think Mount Union's in a ton of trouble, and the best shot that they've got is if they go beat Otterbein, who's a top 50 kind of team, tomorrow, and then end up losing to John Carroll in the OAC final. Then maybe we can talk about them as a bubble team, but I'm still not sure that they get in.
It's similar to, like, as an Illinois Wesleyan fan, just trying to process that the Titans have beaten Augustana and North Central, and like none of these are regionally ranked games. Like year after year, you just think, oh, North Central's coming in, so that's an RRO game. And it's similar in that, like, when a league is down, look at the UAA. Every night out, you're playing an RRO game. In the CCIW, you got Elmhurst and Carthage is hanging on by a thread. So great point. Now, guys, here, and by the way, I have Hood listed. It's not a 1 or a 2. I have Hood listed for Eastern because I think Hood is really, really close to that top 16. To me, it is a gold chip win. But here I took St. Thomas of Texas because 773, I didn't like 507, but I love the win over regional number 1 in a top 16er. I'm sure, Matt, you like Dubuque here, but do you think St. Thomas is a viable pick here?
To me, it's a little high. I would be looking, like you said, Dubuque and Eastern. I think St. Thomas is in the mix, but again, 507 is quite low, and they have the one really good win against regionally ranked opponents. But overall, that strength of schedule is very low. So I don't know how much. I mean, they'll get some good credit for the Trinity win, but it's got to overcome a lot on the strength of schedule there. The winning percentage is good, but not elite. So I think they have some challenges to overcome before we're picking them at 15.
I want to say tonight. Is it matchup 2 of St. Thomas and Trinity? Is that correct?
And then they potentially see them again in the SCAC final. So that SOS is another case where today I'm with Matt. I'm not sure that that's a pick at this point, but by the time we get 10 days from now, and they've got 2 more games against Trinity in there, if they win either one of them, this is probably an easy pick. If they win tonight, their at-large profile improves so much.
Right.
And if they win the other one, they're the conference champion.
Yeah.
But even if they lose them both, I think this resume is going to look a little better by that point. But in my opinion, if they don't win tonight, they've got to get to the final, and they've got to hope there aren't a bunch of bid thieves.
Yeah, if you're St. Thomas, you're looking at tonight's game against Trinity as if we can win this game, we're going to get in the NCAA tournament. And remind me that is that game in Houston? Did they won in San Antonio, didn't they? Is that game
That's
tonight?
A home game.
It's a home game. Yeah. So if you're making Q lines here, I think you've got St. Thomas -2. But So good conversation. Again, we all have our own view on what we're picking here, but the right conversations, and then that brings Pomona Pitzer to the table. Now, Matt Snyder, you'll be happy that I picked Dubuque. I picked Dubuque here.
Great.
We've talked about their resume is solid. Probably could have been picked a few times ago, but I put Dubuque in at this point. I thought that was a pretty safe one. Now you guys are not going to like this one either. I'll tell you this. Eastern is sitting there for sure, and that probably could have been an easy pick here. 696, 800, 499, the 3 with a win over a 1. I know you guys are both disagreeing with my Elmhurst pick, but I had him in here as the best candidate on the board. So your thoughts on Elmhurst, and is their 499 a killer?
To me, once it gets below about 510, you've got to have something that's really compelling to take them. I don't see it here. And that SOS is not going to come up as much as some of the other teams will, because the CCIW is not all that strong. They might be 510 if they lose the final to Illinois Wesleyan. With an 800 winning percentage, maybe, but it's not as compelling as what some of the others are for me.
Matt, what about you?
Yeah.
Is 499 a deal killer here?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out about the resume is the Illinois Wesleyan win, and they're a number 1. But I think when the committee's drilling down into the quality of that number 1, no shots at the Titans, but I don't think you would call them a true number 1 nationally. They're maybe not even really a number 2 nationally. So compared to other regions, I think maybe we discount that some, and it's maybe not as good as the hood win for Eastern, let's say. So I'd probably be looking at Eastern and Pomona Pitzer in this, and I'd be waiting a while on Elmhurst to maybe be the last type of bubble team. But I kind of more agree with Drew. They're going to need some work on their resume to be in that conversation, I think.
And another fair point at this point, round 17, this through 22, what we have 6 left is you're getting to the bid thief problem here. Like anyone that we project here to the end is at the mercy of crazy stuff happening where someone wins a conference that wasn't supposed to, and they take a bid. So like if you're watching this and you're a fan of any team picked here to 22, you shouldn't feel real great. Like these are the bubble of the bubble teams here. I mean, Drew, you talk a lot about, bubble in, bubble out. Do you agree with me that we're starting to get to that point where you worry about bid thieves when you're around 17, 18 here?
100%. You just never know what's going to happen in the conference tournaments. Last year on Saturday morning, we were having conversations in Ohio of Worcester and Wabash are playing in the NCAC final. They're both in. No problem there. And then we saw one bubble pop after another, after another, after another. And by Saturday night, I thought we're going to be a real pleasant surprise if we get in as Worcester after losing that final on a missed buzzer beater. So right now, I'm projecting 4 bid thieves of surprise conference tournament champs in conferences that have another strong team that's going to get it anyway. That's a difference worth making. So if Albion wins the MIAA, then Trine and Calvin are still going to the tournament either way. That's a bid thief. They've gotten an extra bid for that conference.
Right.
If Oberlin wins the NCAC, they're just still the only one. There's one and there's not anybody else. And so that's not going to change some other bubble team situation. And when we simulate this stuff out routinely, there are sims where there is 1 bid thief, and there are sims where there are 9 or 10 bid thieves.
Right.
It's not terribly likely. Most of the time you end up somewhere between about 3 and 6, but you can have just carnage all over the country, like what happened on tournament Saturday last year.
Right.
And all of a sudden these teams that are up around 16, 17 are being knocked out. And even beyond that, the ones that are up around 12, 13, 14 are suddenly at the mercy of what the committee values.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a great point. And again, the stress is like, if you're on the board still at this point, even though I'm picking you, you're probably not feeling great at this point based on historic bid thief scenarios. So I did pick Elmhurst, which brought Chicago in. Chicago is my first red highlight. which just was my way when I was doing my exercise of saying, like, I don't even need to look at them, because you guys agree we can't pick a 591, right? Like, so I just put a red thing that said, okay, just skip that line. But amazingly, Chicago hits the board if Elmhurst gets picked. And, I don't know why I didn't pick Eastern here, because as I look at it, I think I'd pick Eastern if I was doing this all over again. I'm not sure why I didn't. Do you view Albertus's resume as competitive here? I know you'd both probably pick Eastern, and I think I would too if I looked at it again. But do you think Albertus has a competitive resume at this round 18?
Yeah, to me, they're in the discussion here with Eastern, with maybe you throw a few teams in the mix too, like maybe Clark or something. But yeah, I think you could start definitely looking at Albertus at this point.
I'll just keep this rolling in the interest of time, is to say, like, I picked Albertus here. It seemed like 826, 532 was a good combo, albeit maybe a little empty, but I put them in, which brought Westfield State to the board. And I highlighted them in red and told myself not to look at them either. Do you guys agree Westfield State has zero chance here, 488 SOS? Okay.
Correct.
So I did pick Eastern here. And I do think I should have picked Eastern a few picks ago, but I picked Eastern. And that brought Franklin and Marshall to the table. And now my process got really difficult. We're here at round 20. We have 20, 21, 22. Hobart's been sitting on the board. Is Hobart been sitting on the board since round 1? I think, right? Have they been? I believe they've been sitting, right?
Yeah.
783, 526, and 3. Everyone's got some issues here at this point. Everyone sitting on the board has some issue, I think. Hobart, Pomona Pitzer. I don't know. Who would you guys take here?
I personally like Pomona better. I think the issue for me with Hobart is that those regionally ranked wins are empty ones coming in a weak region. Their best wins are Rochester, who has a losing record, RPI, that's not competitive for a Pool C, and St. Lawrence, who's probably not competitive for a Pool C. They have not beaten anybody who is going to get in the tournament without winning their conference.
Right.
And so I'm not sure that Hobart is as competitive as Pomona.
I agree. As I look more at that, I mean, as I look more at it, it's probably more Pomona for me. Matt, what do you think? Pomona, Hobart, who's your pick here?
Yeah, I would probably like the Pomona pick. I would also say that Emory enters the conversation as well, and I'm probably deciding between those two. With the whenever we talk about the UAAs, we have to have the knowledge of like 640 or 600 is their two options for where their winning percentage ends. So I'm kind of assuming now it's more of a 640 resume for me for Emory, and they might enter the discussion in these last few picks.
And people are probably saying, well, you put Carnegie Mellon in, but why not Emory? The big difference for me, and this is around 20. So where was Carnegie? The stuff on the right. Look at Carnegie's wins. So now let's go back to Emory. To me, if you're getting in at 636, you have to have some crazy stuff. And I know 591 is great and 6 is great. But if IWU is a bad number 1, then WashU's a bad number 2. And I know we have WashU on the board already, but there's no other top 16s so to me, I was not taking Emory yet. I was still like, that's not enough at 636. I took Hobart, which brought St. Lawrence to the board. And now I took Pomona Pitzer. So I took Pomona Pitzer here. And now this sets up our final board. And I had a run on the Skyac. Like, look, I think Pomona Pitzer's resume, like you go through all this, these rounds of like, we're getting thin. And then, oh, by the way, Claremont Mudd Scripps has a win over a top 16 number 1 team. What do you guys think of my Claremont Mudd Scripps pick in 22 here?
I definitely think the committee would go long and hard, especially being the last round, to make sure they're getting it right. I think Claremont Mudd Scripps is in that conversation. To me, like just looking through, maybe it comes down. You're looking at 4. You're looking at Claremont Mudd Scripps. You're looking at Emory. You're looking at Mount Union, and you're looking at Clark. Maybe that's the 4 I'm going to. and you're trying to make decisions there. I think Claremont Mud Scripts is reasonable, but again, that's a lot of strength of schedule difference between Claremont Mud Scripts and Emory. Their top win against Cal Lu is a very good one. Maybe that stands out on the board as like maybe the top remaining win. So I can see that.
Yeah, it just seems like that's a great win and that there's nothing bad in their resume.
I can
727.
see this too. I think for me, the issue with Emory is the quality of those wins. Of who have they beaten for Emory? Their wins are over Mary Washington. That's probably not going to get in unless they win the coast to coast tournament. They could be in the conversation potentially. The South region is just so deep. They've beaten Christopher Newport, which looked a lot better in December than it does now. And they've beaten WashU. But they play at Case Western tonight.
Right.
If they win that case, that could change things a little bit.
Total
But
game.
at this
Yeah.
point, I'm with you on the California teams here.
Yeah, I think I really do think that Emory's resume is not what Rochester's was, and it's not even what Carnegie Mellon's is. So again, there's big games that are going to be played the rest of the way here, including tonight. And there's games tonight that can change all this. If Emory loses tonight, that'd be it for them, right? Then they're
Well, that'd be 9, so they could still win their other 2, but I'm not sure that even with the 640 win percentage, they've got enough quality of wins. So probably.
I think that Emory's playing a game tonight that's a must win if they want to play in the NCAA tournament. Those again, great discussion. Again, we all look at this a little bit differently, but we're using the criteria. We're just kind of weighing things a little bit differently, which is how it works. Final topic for you guys. This is, by the way, this is the full list. This is the 1 through 22 as it played out in my picks, and you guys would have had a different version of this, obviously. Drew, bid thieves. If we're starting to gear up to like, oh no, who's going to get us? Walk us through what you've created here on the most likely bid thief conferences and teams.
Sure. Yeah. If you're a fan of a bubble team, you're wanting to see no strong league won by a surprise conference champion.
Right.
When you look at those leagues that have got at least one strong team getting in, you want that strong team or one of those strong teams to win that. So the WIAC, strange year there too, you've really only got one team in the WIAC that's
fascinating,
controlling their own destiny at this point. That Platteville's going to the tournament. There's no question. But if somebody else wins the WIAC, that's a bubble burster because that's suddenly a 2-bid league instead of a 1-bid league. Nobody else in the WIAC is getting in on their own.
Just to point out, Drew, Whitewater never even hit our board in the exercise. Now, I guess we could have looked at, was it Central that was sitting there, but Whitewater is in trouble at this very moment. The data can change, but right now, if you're a Whitewater fan, would you agree, Drew? Like you're needing to become a bid thief in order to play in March.
Yeah, I think they're dead in the water in terms of Pool C at this point, which is shocking to say for a 7-loss team out of the WIAC. But the league is down so much this year. Platteville and Whitewater are the only teams that don't have double-digit losses.
Right.
In that league. They're not getting the strength of schedule they normally do. But here's the issue. Whitewater and La Crosse, I would say, are still solid teams nationally. Some of their issue is that they just played such brutal schedules early on, and they lost too many games. There's some balance in that league. I've got about a 1 in 3 shot that somebody other than Platteville wins that conference championship in the tournament. And if they do, that's an extra bid that's coming off the table that's not available for a bubble team when Platteville gets knocked down to being at large instead of the auto bid.
So Drew, what these bid thief leagues to look for, leagues where there's maybe some balance. There's teams capable of beating the number 1 team, but they're a league where, like the WIAC, Platteville's the only team that we have on the board at this point as an A. And if Whitewater were to come in there and steal that, which they could, I mean, Whitewater winning that conference tournament would shock nobody, right? It would shock nobody. That would steal a bid. And so what you've got is this list of conferences that are the most likely to produce a bid thief. And then you've got you have the teams that are the most likely. Is that what I'm looking at on the right?
That's right. That's right.
And, I'll just say this. I attended the Druid Catholic game, and I think I saw Catholic's worst game of the year by a mile, right? So Drew's a good example. They beat Catholic by like 17 or 19 points, never trailed. Drew's a good example of a team that absolutely could win a conference tournament. They're a really, really good team. All these teams, Stockton. If Stockton wins the NJAC, is anyone going to be shocked? Matt, how do you look at this bid thief list? Like, pretty legit group of teams to keep an eye on here, right?
Yeah, and I think you're exactly correct. Stockton's already beaten Rowan twice. So for them to go through and win the NJAC, that would not be a surprise at all. A team like Oswego State in the SUNYAC, it feels like they're so much stronger than the rest of the conference that they're probably going to win that conference. But we've seen like way crazier stuff than that happens. And if someone else wins the SUNYAC, Oswego is an easy Pool C team, and that's another bid thief. So we have a lot of strong teams. Albertus Magnus, we talked about them as a bubble team, but if they win the GNAC, and St. Joseph is a stronger Pool C team. Right. All of these are games we could definitely see happen. And we're going to get several of them. And that's why, like we mentioned, like at Pool C number 18, those teams should probably feel like they're Pool A or bust, because you don't want to rely on that bubble last couple of spots to feel any level of good about that.
Yeah. And, we talked through the implications of the bid thieves on, like, we got to here-ish. Mm-hmm. If you're here and here, you could never even get a chance, because at the top of the board, 5 teams enter Pool C that are like the ones that we rolled in right off the get-go or shortly after. Remember that group we just went in. If you have 3 or 4 or 5 of those, you never get a chance here. The other thing I'll say is just a disclaimer as we start to wrap up. The real committee would have much more conversation around things like common opponents and head-to-head. On the board, we weren't pulling up, like, did Ramapo play Franklin and Marshall? Those would be factors. And we were really just looking at winning percentage, SOS, and RROs, and kind of the quality. There's much more that the committee would do in parsing this out. So, guys, let me just ask you a little bit in closing. First of all, can't thank you guys enough for taking all of this time to do this. I really, really feel that people will get something out of this. I think people will enjoy this, and they'll learn a little something about, like, how it works. Final thoughts from you, Matt Snyder, on where we are with Pool C currently and what everyone should keep an eye on, like, this weekend.
Yeah, I think the bid thieves this time of the year is key. We're a little bit on just the front end of conference tournaments, so we're a little early for that. UAA standings are a big thing. Like, if you get to 640 and you have that high strength of schedule, that's a lot better than 600. We probably don't see the 600 team get in. But no, the data changes day to day. Just because we say you're in, the margins can be so thin. If we have a lot of bid thieves, like in Division III, just win your Pool A. That's the only way to feel good about it.
Right.
Unless you're one of those top like 5 or 8 teams.
Yeah.
Everyone else is going to want to win their Pool A. There's very few things such as a lead pipe lock at this time of the year. But definitely keep an eye on those types of things.
That's Matt Snyder, who's part of D3 Datacast. They come out with new episodes every Monday morning. You can find Matt's stuff personally at FFTMAG, and then also at D3 Datacast. Drew, who you can find, everyone knows Drew's stuff at D3 Bubble. Amazing stuff this time of year. Drew, what are your final thoughts here as people gear up for another D3 Hoops weekend?
One of the things that I've appreciated since I started doing this 8 years ago is how consistent and predictable the committee gets. I mean, in the most positive way of Matt and Zach and I can pick out the regional rankings and have 95% of the teams that are correct. Or as we're doing the top 16 rankings and have most of them either right on or one slot off. There's the way in which the criteria are being applied are pretty consistent. And that's what lets us be able to look ahead and say, okay, well, if this happens, then here's what we're likely to see the outcome, and not just, and be something more than just taking a blind guess at it. we've got a pretty good sense of how this committee works, and the surprises are generally few. So I think that's a real positive in the way that the criteria are being applied consistently by the committees. And at this point, as we get into the regular season finales and tournament week, I mean, it's time to play ball. And you know, as everybody said, you hope you win your conference tournament so that you don't have to sweat out the weekend or see things turn into March sadness if you're on the wrong side of the bubble.
And just the final thoughts is again, we like to have fun with this bracketology deal, but we're fans of programs. So Matt Snyder, remind us, Calvin plays Trine. Is that an afternoon game tomorrow?
3:00 at Trine on Saturday. Yeah, that's a big one. If Calvin wins, they split the regular season championship. I think Trine's already locked up the #1 seed, but it's a big game. And like we said, if Calvin can win that, they absolutely lock it down. I think Trine's already locked it down. So, you know, we'll probably see 2 MIAAs in the tournament, but there's scenarios where Calvin gets a little dicey if they stumble here.
And then Drew, the Worcester Scots, remind me, who are they facing and when is that game?
Worcester is at Wabash tomorrow afternoon. These two have had several incredible games over the last couple of years. Last year, regular season finale, but was between these two at Worcester, and Worcester hit a 3 at the buzzer to win the regular season title. Same thing tomorrow. Whoever wins this is hosting the tournament next weekend. So huge game, and it'll come down to the tournament winner from that conference is in. So should be fantastic. Great game there too.
Yeah, that's the same matchup we were all watching last year, right? On basically selection day, I think I guess that was a Saturday game last year, so that was huge. And
they went back-to-back Saturdays where Worcester won on a buzzer beater at home.
Yeah.
Then the next Saturday, Wabash was back again. Worcester missed a winning shot at the buzzer, and so Wabash went to the tournament. If it's half as exciting as either of those games, that'll be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And my guys, the Titans, play North Central at home. They've locked up the CCIW #1 seed, which, you know, gives them a path to host and be the Pool A. And they're trying to win the North Central game and one more in the conference tournament in case they fall in the championship. They're trying to keep the door open, which if we went back to that board and we took that IW resume at 704, I think we'd find that they'd be very competitive somewhere in that 16-ish area, maybe right at the bid thief cutoff line somewhere. So fingers crossed. Guys, thank you. This was awesome. People will really enjoy this. Can't thank you enough for your time, and we'll be chatting, I'm sure, online and elsewhere. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bob.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bob.